Our next speaker, her last mile transportation is a non-electric scooter. Everyone, please welcome Abigail.
So the talk I'm going to give today is fairly technical. We're going to talk about classification, about classifying text. We're going to talk about large language models, and I'm going to try to get you to use a library called Marvin for if you are doing certain types of natural language processing tasks with LLMs. But really, why I'm here today and why I'm talking to you and this group about this is that I've now been around the federal government for 17 years now. And I've been a job seeker, and I've also been on the other end of it. So trying to hire, trying to bring people in, trying to bring technical people in. There's a lot that's really non-optimal about the federal hiring process. Okay, so you know this. If you apply to USAJobs, there are a lot of issues. And again, having experience from both sides, there's a lot that's broken that's really not a technical issue, right? We make laws in certain ways, there's policies, there's regulations. There is really dispersed authorities where in order to change something, you really have to talk to like every single person doing hiring. We can't fix any of that today, okay? Like that is all off the table. But there's a very small piece that I want to talk to you about that I think really is a data problem. And that is making our job announcements more legible. So there's a bunch of text, it describes things, we'll sort of go through that. And what I'm going to talk about is how we can use text analysis, and specifically LLMs, to generate more accurate job titles that really describe the duties that the agency wrote in the USAJobs description. Oh no, oh my goodness, guys, this is like embarrassing. I clearly I'm not up to date. Okay, so I've had this experience, you may have had this experience, you go to USAJobs, you search for something, I search for data scientist, and I get a whole variety of jobs. They're not really what I'm looking for, okay? And we can argue about like, what is data science? And that can be really theoretical, and you say something and I say something else. But the important part here is it's a problem when we have people looking for jobs who aren't able to find the actual kinds of jobs they're looking for, okay? So I look for data science and I find jobs that are more data analyst or business intelligence analyst. They're looking for somebody to work in Tableau all day, or they're software developer jobs that I don't have the skills for, or they're really leadership jobs, which are really interesting in some ways, but not really what I'm looking for. And so that's sort of the first barrier. The first way that people interact with this website and interact with federal hiring is they look for a job. And if we make it hard for them, then we're really erecting barriers that don't need to be there. Okay, so we're going to talk about text classification and how we can use large language models. And a big piece of this is helping job seekers, right? But another piece of it is internally, there's all these analytics we want to do, okay? So we want to know things like time to hire. We might want to know things like which types of jobs it's actually really hard to hire for. You put an announcement and it winds up being failed, so you don't actually hire somebody. And so the more information we actually have about how to classify these jobs, the better we're in a position to actually analyze things internally. Okay, so this is what I want to do, right? I want to go to ChatGPT. I want to say like, just show me like actual data science job postings. And that's not exactly what we do here. We work with APIs, but essentially like this is what I want to do. Is like, hey, we have this tool. It's really good at text analysis. Can I just get it to do it for me? Okay, so quick detour. We're going to talk a little about classification problems. Okay, so this is the really standard way we sort of explain this is with ham and spam. So when you get an email to your inbox, behind the scenes, your email client is doing some work, and what it's doing is trying to figure out, is this something I should actually send to your inbox, or is it something that's spam? And it's doing that with a lot of features, but one of those sets of features is just the text in the email. So based on previous emails that have been sent, based on the kinds of feedback you give, so like every time you report spam in Gmail, it updates this model. But this is just a really basic, two-category classification model. And ideally, we want to do some assessments, and I'll talk a little about that. So this is actually like, this would be a really bad model. So we have 479 plus 470 divided by all of this. So it's about a 94% are correctly getting classified. For spam, that would be really bad. For some other kinds of problems that are harder, that would actually be a really good model. So ideally, at the end of any classification problem, we would have something like this, where we would actually be able to assess how well our model is doing. So back to USAJobs listings. You may be familiar with this. It's a jobs listing. You can see there's a lot of different kind of information. We start with like, there's a summary, you can see the agency and the salary, and then you can see this duties section. And in the next slide, we'll look in more depth at what one of those looks like. And that's the text I'm working with for the actual classification. So this is about to be, there's an audience participation part. We can look at this. This is an example duties text section. And we can see there's a bunch of pipelining. You're constructing things, you're automating things, you're eliminating manual participation, all this kind of stuff. You're maintaining databases. What is this job, guys? Give me, throw out something. What would you call this job? Data engineer. Thank you, Will. And I know Will, I did not actually tell him to say that ahead of time. He really just got it right. This is a data engineer job. This is a classic data engineer job. Okay. It's officially labeled scientist. Right? And this is bad for a couple of reasons. This is bad because I look for data scientists and it wastes a little of my time, but it's really bad because if you're an actual data engineer, we want you to be able to look up data engineer and find this position. Also, this position is actually misclassified. Okay, so we'll talk a little about this. There are these 4-digit occupational codes, which are pretty clearly defined by the Office of Personnel Management. And data engineer jobs are really not in 1560, which is the data science position. They're 2210s. Or they're 1560s. There's something else. I don't really care about this as much, but this is something that the federal government kind of does care about a little bit. And this is another thing that you could use this model for, would be detecting which positions are misclassified internally. Okay, we can't overcome text ambiguity problems. If you have basically no information in your duties section, then my model isn't going to be any better at classifying it than a person reading it. So there's again, there's problems we can fix with hiring, there's problems we can't fix with hiring. If this is your duties section, I don't know what it doesn't really matter. My model is going to say it's not going to be very good, right? I have no idea looking at this job what it actually is. Okay, so my kind of minimum viable project workflow, I pulled a bunch of data scientist job listings. So by data scientist, we mean it is categorized in occupational code 1560, which is a fairly new data scientist occupational code. It doesn't mean that title is data scientist, but it means it's broadly supposed to be a data science job. So I pulled those from the API. There's these great 2 USAJobs APIs that you should use if you're interested in this. One of them is current jobs, one of them is previous jobs, this is old jobs. This is basically 2022 to present. I dropped a handful of them that had no duty list or said, go to this other website to find the duties. That's okay, I'm not doing that. And then I used a library called Marvin to get structured output from GPT. So really all I wanted back was a job title, right? I didn't want an explanation, I wanted the job title. And so with Marvin, I was able to get that really easily. And then I did some analysis and iteration. Okay, so I'm at an R conference. I'm telling you why you should use a Python library. I recognize this is slightly problematic, but why I think you should use this is because you don't actually have to write any Python code. Okay, this is not like 9 lines of code. None of it's really Python. There's 1 line to call it. And the real work that's happening here is actually this doc string. So it's this given duties, generate a specific job title based on the content, not based on any titles contained in the text. And this is a comment, but this library is actually going to use that in how it creates the prompt to send to GPT. That's really the work that's happening here. And the rest is like a class description, doesn't really matter. But this is the library that does it. There's no other library. And it's pretty easy to call Python code from R. And again, like 9 lines, like definitely worth it. It means I don't have to write prompts that say things like, please only give me the job title in all caps. Like I don't do any of that. I know what I'm going to get back is just a really clean job title. Okay, so what do we actually get from this? We can get a view of the variety of different roles that are getting advertised as 1560s. We can get a prototype job labeling system for applicants. Again, though, we can sort of give to somebody, like this is how you can search. We can get a way to highlight jobs that might be mislabeled, challenging to hire for, or misclassified. I'll talk a little about that. But for instance, if my job labeling system says like this is a chief data science officer and you're hiring in a GS13, like that could be really hard. So we can flag some things that way. And again, a variable that might be predictive for research and analysis. This isn't like this is the answer. It's not like ChatGPT is brilliant, it gives us the best answer, but it gives us an answer. I think that answer can be really useful. Okay, so I'll show you some graphs. We're going to look at overall difference in top titles between my classifier and the official job titles. we'll look at some job titles that never appear in the official job listings, but do appear in mine, and we'll do some spot checks. So here we go. Comparing the top 10 job titles of my LLM, so that's on the left, the things that GPT generated, versus the official titles. So the big thing you'll see is that data analyst is number 2 on the titles that my model generated, and it doesn't appear at all in the top 10. And those are really the jobs that are like, you're working in Excel, maybe you're making dashboards, and maybe those jobs actually do involve coding. Maybe the duties section is not accurate. But if this is what the model is seeing, this is what we can expect our applicants to be seeing also. And you can see here again, also there's that chief data officer, chief data scientist. Those are jobs that aren't necessarily labeled that way, and they're not necessarily called that, but the scope of duties there is pretty big. Like these look like leadership positions, which first of all is interesting because that's appealing to people. People maybe want those jobs, and so if we're not advertising that way, we're missing out, but also the possible mismatch between grade or salary and between the scope of duties. Okay, so these are job titles which appear in the LLM generated titles, but never appear in the official job titles. So some of these are not that useful. Some of these are things somebody might want to search for. So like geospatial analyst, if I'm a geospatial person, I'd probably like to be able to look for that. If I'm, again, data engineer appears there, software engineer, if it's really a software engineer job, it's probably misclassified, but it might be interdisciplinary, it might be listed under both. So yeah, some of these are just genuinely interesting job titles that contain information and that somebody might really want to look for. Okay, so some big title discrepancies. This is titled data scientist, but my model said it was a data analyst. And you can see like it mentions macros, it mentions pivot tables, it doesn't really mention programming. Okay, so that's a mismatch. Technical program manager. This looks really interesting. Like I think a lot of people would really be interested in this job. You're providing technical leadership, you're providing reports. It's not really a data science job. Okay, but what's better than ad hoc assessment is systematic assessment, right? Like I can show you like this one worked out well, I liked this, but really what we want to be doing here ideally is actually getting something like what I showed you for that confusion matrix earlier. What we want to be saying is how well does this actually do relative to the current titling system. Okay, so how this would work if the government actually wanted to do this is ideally we would get somebody with expert knowledge to look at these duty sections, and then they would label them and they would say this looks like this kind of job. And then it would be a little complicated how we could actually compare, because what we probably want to do is some kind of comparison of semantic meaning. Like there's so many job titles here that like realistically maybe data engineer is straightforward, but what makes something a data science specialist job versus a data science manager job? So we'd have to do some work, we have to make some other choices, but ideally that's really where this would go, is we do some real systematic assessments of what these jobs actually contain. And I'll say briefly because I do a few more minutes, this isn't exact, like I'm calling this a classification problem. It's not exactly a classification problem. So typically for classification problems, we have a list of preset categories. So like for instance, ham and spam, there can be more than 2. This is it's more like a generative task. So, and that's not something we really pre-LLMs, you wouldn't really have had a task exactly like this, but you could have done a few things. Either you would have had multi-class classification, where I could have written out 10 different job titles and it would sort them into buckets, or I could have done something more unstructured, like I could have clustered my jobs by how similar they were. And I'm not really doing either of those. So it's not exactly classification. We could make it into a more standard classification problem where we could write 10 different job titles and then other, and we get the LLM to do that. I tried it, it didn't really work very well. And I think part of what's valuable about this is seeing the real range of jobs. And so it's being able to say, this is a geospatial job, even if there's only 2 of them, we still want to be able to do that. And we're not really going to come up with categories ahead of time. And that also makes doing the systematic assessment challenging, but it's still doable. And I think it's still ultimately worth it. Okay, so I tried a lot of other things too. I tried named entity recognition. So named entity recognition is another classic natural language processing problem. And so what I was interested in was that were the names of software tools and programming languages in each of these, because I think that gives you a lot of information about a job listing. Like if a job listing says Tableau, Power BI, Python, R, Stata, C++, I wish I were making this up, I am not, then this is a job listing that's pretty confused about what they're looking for, okay? If it says Python, R, Docker, Git, like cool, okay, like we're good here. And if it says, again, if it says sort of Excel, Power BI, Tableau, that's probably a data analyst job. And so they probably do know what they're looking for. It's not really a data science job. So I think that that's really another way of looking at job listings. And it worked pretty well. So again, Marvin really helped with that. I was able to write a prompt which asked specifically for tools and software, and it gave me a really nice dictionary. So it gave me just a really, really nice format in a way that I struggled more to get by myself. So that worked well. Grouping by category, so saying, tell me if this is a management job, a data analyst job. Again, trying to do a more standard classification problem with preset categories. It didn't work as well. I think maybe there's some promise there, but I couldn't really get it to work. And then comparing actual titles and generated titles. So like, tell me, is the title you generated, the LLM made, how different is that from the actual official job listing? That just really didn't work. I think maybe it needed more context about what I meant by different. I wasn't able to get it. Okay, so what's next? My hope is, I know a lot of folks here work for the federal government, like you're interested in hiring, or if you're a job seeker who is interested in doing some of this analytically, my stuff is on GitHub. So if you go to my GitHub profile, then like the first thing is you can see both the slides and the code that generated all of this. So if you want to use this in some capacity, like I'd love to talk to you. Like this is very doable. It's very easy to get started. Like we really can go very quickly from your data to some answers, just like immediately. Also, if you have a text classification problem, I think you should, or for that matter, another type of NLP problem, I think you should think about large language models generally as a way of going, again, really quickly from your problem to some data, to some answers. And then you can, again, assess, like it might work, it might not, but it's so fast to get started. And LLMs are this sort of like pre-trained in everything models where there's so much data they've been trained on that they might be good at your problem. So LLMs generally, and also Marvin specifically, so that you don't have to fight with the LLM to be like, give me a dictionary, please, that is outputted in this way, please just give me this, right? With Marvin, you're not fighting with the LLM to do that. Okay, and yeah, that's all. Come up with me afterwards for questions, or if you want to use my code. Thank you.